Beloved one, before you even clicked on this message, something had already begun to shift around you. There is a truth that has been moving quietly in the background of your life, slowly, patiently, like light pushing through the cracks of a closed door. And the strange thing is this: the person who tried to work against you still believes their secret is safe. They still think the story is under their control. But what they don't realize is that the moment they made their move against you, the process of exposure had already begun. Listen carefully, because this is not just about conflict or betrayal. This is about a universal law that has existed long before any human plan or hidden scheme. Every action that is planted in secrecy carries within it the seed of its own revelation. Every whisper spoken in darkness slowly builds an echo that one day returns to the surface. And when someone chooses to secretly work against another person, especially someone walking in purpose, they unknowingly begin building the very circumstances that will reveal their intentions. There is a deeper principle behind this. When a person operates through deception, manipulation, or hidden hostility, they believe they are controlling the narrative. They believe silence protects them. They believe no one sees the subtle things they do. The small distortions, the quiet undermining, the carefully planted doubts about you in conversations you were never part of. But the universe does not operate on human secrecy. Truth has gravity. It pulls hidden things into the open over time. And this is where psychology begins to expose something fascinating about the mindset of an enemy. Studies in behavioral psychology often show that betrayal rarely comes from strangers. In fact, researchers estimate that nearly 80% of personal betrayals come from people who once had some form of access to your trust. Someone who knew your personality. Someone who observed your strengths. Someone who watched how others respected you. Instead of being inspired by what they saw, something darker began to grow inside them: comparison. Comparison is one of the quietest but most dangerous psychological triggers. It begins with a simple internal question: why them and not me? And when that question sits in someone's mind long enough, it slowly transforms into justification. Suddenly they start interpreting everything you do through a distorted lens. Your progress becomes arrogance in their mind. Your quiet confidence becomes a threat. Your peace becomes something they feel the need to disturb. Many enemies are not born through hatred. They are created through insecurity. Psychologists often call this projection behavior. When someone secretly feels inadequate, they project those feelings outward by trying to weaken the person who triggers that insecurity. Instead of improving themselves, they attempt to adjust the environment around you. Sometimes this happens through subtle gossip. Sometimes through silent sabotage. Sometimes through pretending to support you while quietly hoping something goes wrong. But here is the part they never understand. When someone spends that much energy watching you, studying you, analyzing you, trying to predict your steps, they unknowingly place themselves in a dangerous position. Because the more attention they give to controlling your story, the more visible their own behavior becomes over time. Think about real life for a moment. There are countless situations where someone secretly tried to discredit another person, at work, within a family, inside friendships. They planted small doubts in conversations: I'm not sure you can really trust them. They framed themselves as the reasonable voice while slowly shaping a negative perception about you. For a while, it may even have seemed like their strategy worked. People hesitated. Conversations changed. The atmosphere shifted. But eventually something strange begins to happen. Patterns reveal themselves. People start noticing inconsistencies. Stories stop matching. The person spreading doubt becomes the only common denominator in multiple conflicts. And slowly, almost quietly, the attention turns toward them. Not because you fought back loudly, but because truth has a way of reorganizing the room. You see, beloved one, your enemy believed they were writing the ending of your story. They assumed that if they worked quietly enough, carefully enough, strategically enough, they could control how others see you. What they didn't understand is that hidden motives cannot stay hidden forever. Human behavior always leaves fingerprints. Tone changes. Body language shifts. Words contradict actions. And over time, people begin to sense it. Something feels off. Something doesn't align. Something about the way that person talks about you begins to reveal more about them than it ever did about you. This is the moment where the quiet exposure begins. Not through dramatic confrontation. Not through revenge. But through the slow unfolding of truth that even they cannot stop. Because the moment someone chooses deception as their strategy, they also choose the consequences that come with it. Deception requires constant maintenance. Lies must be remembered. Stories must stay consistent. Masks must remain in place. And the longer someone maintains a mask, the more exhausting it becomes. Eventually cracks appear. And beloved one, those cracks are already forming. Right now, somewhere in your life, there are people beginning to notice small things they ignored before. Words that didn't sit right. Reactions that felt forced. Situations that suddenly look very different when viewed from another angle. The truth about your enemy is not simply going to appear one day like a sudden explosion. It unfolds like dawn. Slow. Inevitable. Impossible to stop. But what happened next, is the part your enemy never predicted. Beloved one, there comes a moment in every hidden conflict where the atmosphere begins to change. At first, nothing looks different on the surface. Conversations continue. Smiles still appear in public. Life seems to move forward as usual. But beneath the surface, something subtle has already begun to shift. The balance that once protected deception starts to tilt. The carefully built illusion that someone constructed around your name slowly begins to weaken. This is the turning point most enemies never anticipate. Because when a person chooses secrecy as their weapon, they believe exposure requires confrontation. They imagine that truth only comes out through arguments, accusations, or dramatic moments. But what they fail to understand is that sometimes the greatest shift happens quietly, through circumstances they cannot control. There are moments when the direction of a situation changes in ways no human strategy could produce. Conversations start happening between people who never compared notes before. Someone suddenly remembers a detail that didn't make sense months earlier. A comment that once seemed harmless now sounds suspicious when placed next to another piece of information. It is as if invisible threads are slowly being pulled together. And in those moments, the atmosphere begins to whisper a truth that cannot remain buried. Heaven is whispering. What was done in the dark will not stay hidden forever. The strange part is that when this shift begins, the enemy often feels it before anyone else fully understands it. Something inside them starts recognizing that the structure they built is becoming unstable. Their confidence changes. Their behavior becomes inconsistent. The calm control they once carried slowly turns into quiet anxiety. Psychologists have long studied what happens when someone fears exposure. Research into behavioral stress responses shows that nearly 65% of people who are hiding deception begin displaying subtle panic behaviors once they sense the truth getting closer. They speak more defensively than usual. They over-explain situations that nobody questioned yet. They attempt to redirect attention away from certain topics. Sometimes they even begin accusing others preemptively, hoping to confuse the narrative before it fully forms. It is not because they are suddenly guilty. It is because they are suddenly afraid. When a person realizes the story they carefully crafted may begin to unravel, their mind enters a state of psychological pressure. Every conversation becomes a potential threat. Every unexpected question feels dangerous. Even silence from others begins to feel suspicious. Think about how this plays out in real life. Imagine a workplace where someone quietly undermined a colleague for months. They positioned themselves as the helpful voice while subtly questioning that colleague's reliability behind closed doors. At first, people believed them. The narrative seemed reasonable. After all, they spoke calmly and confidently. But one day, two co-workers casually compare experiences. One mentioned something strange that was said about you weeks ago. Another realizes that the same person told them a slightly different version of the same story. Suddenly a small inconsistency appears. Then another. At first, nobody says anything out loud. But the awareness spreads quietly. People start watching more carefully. And the person who created the narrative begins to feel it. Their tone changes in meetings. They interrupt conversations more often. They attempt to control discussions in ways they didn't before. The fear of losing control pushes them to behave in ways that ironically reveal more about their intentions than silence ever did. The same pattern appears within families. Sometimes jealousy hides itself behind concern. A relative may speak as though they are protecting others from you while subtly planting seeds of doubt about your character. For a long time, people may not question it. After all, family voices often carry automatic trust. But time has a way of testing every narrative. One day someone notices that the criticism always flows in one direction. Another person realizes that every conflict somehow traces back to the same source. The realization doesn't explode all at once. It grows slowly, like awareness spreading through a room. And when that awareness begins to form, the person who tried to manipulate the situation starts feeling something they cannot control: pressure. Hidden jealousy behaves the same way. A friend who secretly envied your progress may have smiled while quietly celebrating your struggles. They may have pretended to support your goals while hoping circumstances would hold you back. For a while, they believed their mask was perfect. But envy has a weakness. It cannot remain neutral when someone continues rising. Eventually the tension between their words and their emotions becomes visible. Their reactions stop matching the situation. Their support sounds forced. Their energy shifts when good things happen for you. And the people around them begin to notice. This is the moment when the turning point becomes irreversible. Not because you exposed them. Not because you fought for your reputation. But because the truth began revealing itself through patterns no one could ignore forever. Beloved one, your enemy believed they were moving pieces on a board only they understood. They assumed they were several steps ahead. They assumed your silence meant ignorance. They assumed time would bury their actions deep enough that no one would ever question them. But they forgot something important. Truth does not need noise to survive. It only needs time. Right now, the situation around you may still look ordinary. Nothing dramatic may have happened yet. But beneath the surface, the pieces are already shifting. Awareness is forming. Observations are connecting. The quiet exposure has already begun. And the most surprising part of this entire process is still ahead. Because the first revelation, the one that begins uncovering everything, is the one that shocks them the most. Beloved one, the moment truth begins moving through a situation, it does not reveal everything at once. Exposure unfolds in layers. First the atmosphere changes, then awareness begins to form, and eventually the deeper realities behind someone's intentions start surfacing one by one. And the first two revelations about your enemy are already beginning to take shape, though they never imagined it would happen this way. Revelation 4, they assumed your silence meant weakness. Your enemy made an assumption about you. They studied your quiet nature, your patience, your refusal to react to every provocation, and they came to a conclusion. In their mind, your calmness was not strength. They interpreted it as passivity. They believed that because you didn't immediately defend yourself or confront every whisper, you were unaware, or incapable. That was the assumption. But the misjudgment behind that assumption is what created their downfall. They misunderstood the difference between silence and helplessness. They believe that if someone doesn't respond loudly, they must not see what is happening. They believed patience meant ignorance. They believed restraint meant fear. Psychologists often observe this dynamic in social conflicts. Research into interpersonal manipulation shows that nearly 70% of people who attempt covert sabotage specifically target individuals they believe will not retaliate quickly. In other words, they choose their targets based on perceived emotional restraint. They assume calm personalities will be easier to control. But what your enemy failed to recognize was the hidden strength inside that restraint. Silence can be observation. Patience can be strategy. And composure can be power. While they were busy constructing their narrative about you, something else was happening quietly. People were watching how you carried yourself. They noticed that despite pressure, you remained consistent. Despite subtle hostility, you did not descend into the same behavior. Your stability began creating a contrast. And contrast is the beginning of exposure. Because when two people are involved in a hidden conflict, observers eventually begin comparing patterns. One person remains steady, measured, and focused. The other slowly becomes more reactive, more defensive, more controlling of conversations. Over time, the difference becomes impossible to ignore. Consider a real-life example many people experience. In a workplace environment, someone quietly spreads doubts about a colleague's reliability. They frame their comments as concern, pretending to help while subtly planting questions about the other person's competence. For a while, the narrative floats in the air without challenge. But then something interesting begins to happen. The colleague being criticized continues performing consistently. Deadlines are met. Responsibilities are handled calmly. Interactions remain professional. Meanwhile, the person spreading doubt becomes increasingly invested in reinforcing their story. They repeat it in multiple conversations. They add new details. They try harder to shape the perception. And that effort begins to reveal something. People start noticing who keeps bringing up the issue. People start noticing who seems strangely invested in controlling how someone else is viewed. What began as an assumption about weakness slowly transforms into exposure of motive. And that brings us to the next layer. Revelation 3, they underestimated the intelligence of the people around you. Your enemy believed their narrative would remain unquestioned. They assumed others would accept their interpretation of events without looking deeper. In their mind, people were passive observers who would simply absorb whatever story was presented. But this was another miscalculation. Human perception is far more perceptive than manipulators expect. Studies on social awareness suggest that nearly 60% of people eventually detect inconsistencies when someone repeatedly speaks negatively about the same individual. Even if they remain silent at first, their minds begin collecting details. They notice tone shifts. They remember contradictions. They observe emotional patterns. In other words, people may not react immediately, but they are still observing. And over time, those observations build a quiet understanding. Imagine a family situation where one relative subtly tries to isolate another family member. They frame themselves as the voice of reason while quietly questioning the intentions of the other person. For a while, the narrative appears convincing. But months later, a cousin remembers a conversation that doesn't align with the story. An aunt recalls a moment when the concerned relative reacted strangely to good news about you. Slowly, pieces begin connecting. No confrontation happens yet. But perception shifts. The person who once seemed trustworthy suddenly appears, calculated. And beloved one, when perception shifts, influence begins to fade. This is the stage your enemy never prepared for. They planned for arguments. They prepared for denial. They expected confrontation they could deflect. But they did not plan for quiet realization spreading through the people around them. Because once people start seeing patterns, the narrative no longer belongs to the manipulator. It belongs to truth. And the deeper this realization grows, the harder it becomes for your enemy to maintain control over the story they created. Their words carry less weight. Their explanations sound rehearsed. Their attempts to redirect attention begin looking suspicious rather than persuasive. The exposure has already started unfolding. But the most significant revelations are still ahead. Because even now, your enemy does not fully understand the biggest mistake they made. Beloved one, by the time truth begins revealing the deeper layers of a hidden conflict, the situation has already moved beyond human control. What once looked like a simple misunderstanding, quiet jealousy, or subtle manipulation begins transforming into something far greater, a moment of divine alignment where hidden motives meet unavoidable consequences. Your enemy believed they were managing every detail carefully. They believed they could control the pace of events. But they forgot one powerful reality. There is a timing that exists beyond human strategy. And this brings us to the next revelation. Revelation 2, they underestimated the timing of heaven. Your enemy assumed they had time. Time to strengthen their narrative. Time to influence the opinions of others. Time to quietly push you into a corner where your voice would no longer matter. In their mind, exposure was something distant. Something that might never happen if they maintained control long enough. But what they didn't understand is that truth operates on a clock they cannot see. There are moments when circumstances suddenly align in ways no human planning could arrange. Conversations intersect at the right moment. People who never compared notes before suddenly share information. Someone who once believed the narrative begins asking deeper questions. What once seemed stable starts shifting with quiet but unstoppable force. Heaven is speaking again, softly but clearly. There is nothing concealed that will not be brought to light, and nothing hidden that will remain unknown. This is the moment your enemy begins to feel something they cannot explain. Their confidence weakens. Their calm tone begins to carry tension. They sense that something is changing around them, though they may not yet understand what. Psychologists describe this moment as anticipatory anxiety, the stress response that appears when someone fears exposure but cannot predict when it will happen. Studies show that nearly 68% of individuals who are hiding deception begin making strategic mistakes once this anxiety sets in. They overreact to simple questions. They contradict themselves unintentionally. They try to control conversations more aggressively than before. And ironically, those reactions reveal even more. Imagine someone who quietly worked to damage another person's reputation in a professional environment. For months, they planted subtle suggestions in private conversations. They believed their influence was strong enough to shape how others saw you. But then, suddenly, circumstances shift. A supervisor begins reviewing past situations more carefully. A colleague remembers something unusual that happened months ago. An email conversation resurfaces that contradicts the narrative that was quietly spread. In a single moment, the illusion of control begins to collapse. Not because you exposed them, but because the timing of truth arrived. This is the moment your enemy never prepared for, the moment when the story they constructed starts rewriting itself in the minds of others. And that leads to the final and most powerful revelation. Revelation 1, the ultimate truth about your enemy is this. Their greatest mistake was believing your destiny depended on their opinion. Your enemy believed they were powerful enough to limit what was meant for you. They assumed that by shaping how others perceived you, they could shape the direction of your life. They thought that controlling a few conversations, influencing a few relationships, or damaging your image in certain circles would be enough to slow down what was unfolding for you. But destiny does not operate on human approval. It operates on alignment. And when someone attempts to stand in the way of a purpose they do not fully understand, they unknowingly place themselves in conflict with something far greater than personal influence. This is why exposure becomes inevitable. Because when someone fights against truth, they eventually exhaust themselves trying to maintain a position that reality itself refuses to support. People begin seeing what they couldn't see before. The calm dignity you carried through pressure suddenly makes sense. The strange hostility that once surrounded you now reveals its origin. Situations that once felt confusing begin forming a clear picture. And the most painful realization for your enemy is not simply that they are being exposed. It is that the person they tried to diminish continues rising. While they were focused on controlling perception, your character continued speaking for itself. While they invested energy into manipulating narratives, you invested energy into growth, consistency, and resilience. And that difference becomes impossible to ignore. Beloved one, this is the moment where destinies separate. One path leads upward through truth, patience, and integrity. The other collapses under the weight of deception. Your enemy believed the story would end with your silence being interpreted as defeat. They believed your calmness meant the narrative belonged to them. But the reality unfolding now tells a very different story. Because the final verdict is already being written. Beloved one, by the time the final stage of truth begins unfolding, something remarkable happens. The situation that once felt confusing suddenly becomes clear. The tension that surrounded your name begins to dissolve. The whispers lose their power. And the person who once believed they controlled the narrative slowly finds themselves standing in the very light they tried so hard to avoid. This is the final verdict. Not the kind written through arguments or revenge. Not the kind delivered through dramatic confrontation. The verdict that matters most is the one written through time, observation, and truth revealing itself through human behavior. Because in the end, the most powerful exposure rarely comes from what you say, it comes from what people begin to see for themselves. Your enemy believed they could operate behind the curtain forever. They believed that if their words were subtle enough and their intentions hidden carefully enough, the story about you would become permanent. But deception has a weakness that no strategy can fully protect. It requires constant effort to maintain. A lie must always remember the lie that came before it. A manipulation must always keep adjusting to new circumstances. A false narrative must be defended again and again whenever someone asks a deeper question. And over time, that effort becomes exhausting. Eventually, the mask slips. Not necessarily through one dramatic moment, but through a series of small revelations that slowly reshape how others see the situation. Someone notices the contradictions. Someone remembers a detail that doesn't align. Someone observes a reaction that feels strangely defensive. And piece by piece, the truth rebuilds itself in the minds of those around you. Psychological studies on reputation dynamics show that nearly 72% of false narratives collapse over time once observers begin comparing behavior instead of listening only to words. Actions become evidence. Patterns become clarity. And once people begin trusting their observations more than someone's narrative, the illusion begins to crumble. This is exactly where the story changes. Because the person who tried to diminish you eventually becomes known for the very behavior they tried to hide. The energy they invested into shaping your reputation begins shaping their own. The tone they used against you becomes the tone others start noticing in them. And suddenly the roles reverse. The one who quietly endured becomes respected for their composure. The one who quietly manipulated becomes recognized for their pattern. Beloved one, this is not coincidence. This is alignment. There are moments in life when the truth arrives not to destroy someone else, but to reveal something greater about you. The patience you carried through misunderstanding. The discipline you maintained when reacting would have been easier. The dignity you held when your character was questioned. Those qualities were not weakness. They were preparation. Because the greatest strength is not the ability to win arguments, it is the ability to remain grounded while truth unfolds in its own time. Now that the narrative is shifting, the most powerful thing you can do is something many people underestimate. Remain steady. Do not chase validation. Do not rush to correct every misunderstanding. Do not become consumed with proving anything to anyone. The moment people begin seeing the truth for themselves is the moment your voice becomes unnecessary. Silence, when supported by integrity, becomes its own testimony. Dignity becomes louder than explanation. Patience becomes proof. Your role was never to fight every whisper. Your role was to continue walking forward in the person you were always meant to be. Because when someone truly belongs in their purpose, their life eventually begins speaking louder than any rumor ever could. And the strange thing is this, the very situation that once felt unfair now becomes the evidence of your character. People remember how you responded. They remember that you did not collapse under pressure. They remember that while others reacted emotionally, you remained anchored. This is the moment where empowerment begins. You are not defined by the actions of those who misunderstood you. You are not limited by the opinions of those who tried to control your narrative. Your identity does not come from the voices that questioned you, it comes from the quiet strength that carried you through the storm. And the truth is, beloved one, many who listen to these words have lived through similar moments. Situations where someone close betrayed trust. Moments where hidden jealousy created confusion. Seasons where silence felt like the only response that preserved your peace. If this message resonates with your spirit, quietly acknowledge it. And remain connected to this space. Not for noise or attention, but for clarity. For strength. For the reminder that truth always finds its way to the surface, no matter how carefully someone tries to bury it. Because the story you thought was about betrayal was actually about revelation. Revelation of character. Revelation of resilience. Revelation of who you truly are when pressure tests your spirit. And now, as the final pieces fall into place, the message becomes clear. The truth about your enemy was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to reveal who you really are.